Hello and welcome to this online teaching series, which is split into two videos on how to achieve personal success through cultural competence and awareness. My name's Mark Moser. I'm a consultant for intercultural competence, focusing on professional and personal competence related to these topics. We are shaped by the world we are in. And in this series, I want to look at how we can learn to navigate, respond to the reality of an ever-changing world, which is affecting us all in so many different ways. In part one today, I want to focus on my culture identity. How can I increase my awareness of seeing the world, perceiving it, making sense of this in a way that I can benefit from, which leads me to more success, new experiences, new interactions, and new friendships ultimately. Seeing and acknowledging yourself, acknowledging others, has a lot to do with confidence. And that's what we're going to focus on today. From COVID to a rapidly changing political, economical environment, we are surrounded by changes in the cultures we're living in. We have friends who eat rice for breakfast, a work colleague going and praying in the temple on Friday. The world as we grew up in and were familiar with is changing so rapidly that it can leave us with a sense of disorientation, maybe bewilderment, maybe hesitancy to embrace these changes, and sometimes the wish to go back into a cave and find security and halt in what we are familiar with. Our customer advisor, when we call the mobile communication center, may be sitting on the other side of the world, advising us. Maybe the car that we drive is being fixed by somebody who is very, very different to us. How do I deal with all these unfamiliars? How do I respond to them? I don't think that there's just a good or a right and a wrong way. But I believe that it's helpful to know what our response is. So we will look at how the world shapes us. We will look at how my culture has shaped me to be the person I am today. And last and most importantly, how can I benefit from cultural competence? And what does cultural competence mean? What do I mean when I talk about culture? There are many different definitions of culture, and I'd like to just lead you through some of the more familiar ones. Culture is a set of beliefs, values, and norms which lead groups of people to a common, normal behavior. So what is socially accepted, familiar, and common in a group can be called culture, if you want to use that word. I'm not only talking about national cultures or ethnic cultures, also about different cultures of organization, of family, of institutions. You could look at a church, a club, a soccer culture. What is important to differentiate is the culture. When we talk about culture, we're always looking at a group behavior. Personality is how I individually respond in a situation, and culture is how the group that I am part of responds in that specific situation. There's a well-known famous Dutch researcher who passed away recently, Geert Hofstede, who is kind of the guru on culture, and he says, culture is the collective programming of the mind of a group of people. Now, programming may kind of sound technical, but what he means is in the first 0 to 5 years of our lives, we are socialized and taught as babies, as toddlers, what is acceptable in the culture group that we are part of. Let me give you an example. In Papua New Guinea, where I grew up, it was culturally norm and accepted that one only eats meals together. So I was taught never to eat alone, whether I was hungry or not. It was unthinkable and inappropriate to eat on my own. So I would always look for a group of others to have a meal with and share a meal with when I was hungry. I came back to Switzerland when I was 14, 15 years old, and my parents and my sister told me, Mark, in Switzerland you will have to learn to eat on your own. And I remember very well one day I went to the Migros restaurant in Bern. There was like a self-service restaurant with some American-style booths, and it was slightly after rush hour, 2 p.m., and I had my tray, and the restaurant was virtually empty. In the back of the restaurant, there was a lady sitting, and I took my tray, went, sat down, and she looked at me, breathed heavily, took her tray of plate, and went to the other side of the restaurant, giving me not very friendly looks and breathing really heavily. I still hear that today. And I thought, what did I do wrong? And of course, I remembered, my sister told me not to talk to strangers. I have to learn to eat on my own. And in that moment, my reflexes of doing how and acting according to my default programming just took over. Now, if you have a smartphone, you could think of culture as the operating system which has been loaded initially onto your smartphone. So it's iOS, or whether you have an Android system or whatever. The functionality of these systems are very similar today. You can text, use all the apps, make photos, etc. But if you're using an Android system and I have an iOS system, I cannot just send you my app. There will be an error message between our two gadgets. This is very similar on a human level. So the operating system is the programming that we are given in the ages of 0 to 5. But there are also other levels of software, of culture. So maybe you're planning a vacation after COVID crisis in Turkey, and you go to Turkey and you're aware, here I am going to eat food that is different from what I usually eat at home. Or you will be aware that language and religion is different. So what you're doing, if you're a bit open culturally, is you will be adapting your app. You'll be updating it for the period of time that you're going on vacation. So you update this software. When you go back to the UK, to Australia, to Switzerland, where you call home, you ignore this app and you operate again with your regular software of culture and what is norm and familiar with and comfortable to you. This is an example of how we can influence and choose to change the software that we operate by. And not always is it such a conscious choice. However, it's very difficult to update or change the operating system. So the software on the lowest level, most fundamental level of our human existence. It took me years to learn to not to approach strangers in Switzerland and just to start talking to them. When I go into a train and there are 3 people sitting in a forward compartment and there's an empty compartment, where do you think I automatically go and sit? Well, of course I go into the just about full one because I've been raised to be a respectful and kind and considerate person. And I hear my sister in my ears telling me, Mark, no, go and sit in the empty one. You know, Swiss don't appreciate it when they want their space and their privacy. I thought, what's wrong with them? So this is a simple bit of information. It's not very complex. but my reflex is still here today to go where there are people, not to go where I'm alone. Of course, I have learned to adapt and change that based on what I am ready to compromise. But it's been quite a long, and it's not an easy process to change these basic programmings. So culture affects behaviors. It affects interpretations. Do I interpret the person who doesn't come and sit with me in the empty train as being unfriendly if he chooses the empty compartment? If I'm not greeted at the bus station? Culture effects is acquired, so I can learn to change it, but it's also given and implanted in us. And lastly, to this point, culture exists by comparison. If you live in a monocultural setting, maybe you're a Google employee or you work in a bank, and if you would never experience anything different, I assume the culture wouldn't be much of an issue. But as soon as we see difference in behavior, I remember my son coming home from school one day and saying, they said that I was strange. I said, why did your colleagues say that? And he said, because I eat rice for breakfast. And all of a sudden, culture becomes a topic by comparison. So culture, the software of us human beings, shapes how we see the world, the environment, how we get in contact and interact and define relationships and friendships. Who do we respect? There's a famous research question where people are asked, if you are in a boat and the boat is sinking and somebody comes and is going to save you from drowning, and there are three people, it's you, your mother and your child, but there's only space for one person on the rescue boat. Who do you choose to save? Now that is a cultural question, we have found out. Research has shown that in many Asian countries, it's very clear that the mother is saved because the mother is the giver of life, has the most respect. In many Anglo-Saxon Western countries, the vast majorities of people who have answered this survey question said, of course, the child. This shows how we value age, social relationships, etc. Culture also shapes how we deal with time, how we make sense of time. Is somebody being disrespectful if he or she comes 10 minutes late? Or is it worse to come 10 minutes early? All these are cultural aspects. I'd like to give you one more example of what culture is. You can compare culture with an onion. Now, we all know that you can do a lot with onion. You can make a delicious lamb biryani. You can make, spicing up your salad sauce. Or you can create a pickle if you've got a sore throat. You can cut the onions, put it on a bit of towel, put it around your throat, and most likely you will have less sore throat tomorrow morning. Or we know we can use an onion to preserve meat, whatever. We know that because we know how the onion grows. Now, if we compare the onion to culture, one could say the outside layer are the behaviors and the products of culture. So maybe it's some religious acts, maybe it's how we interact with each other. What does a red light mean? On the inner level, we have the systems informing or telling us why that we should behave like that. On even a more inner level of this onion, we have norms and institutions and values. And so we can open up this onion layer by layer to understand what layer is informing how I behaved today. Let me give you an example. If I see a red light in Switzerland and I'm driving home on my bike, I usually stop. not always, but I usually do, because the red light says stop, and it means stop for everybody. If I talk to my police friends and ask, what's the idea of you guys enforcing a red light? Why do you do this? Are you just trying to harass me? They'll say, no, we want to ensure your safety. Aha. Safety, why is that important? Well, because we treasure human life. So you see, I'm now going in the inside aspects of this culture onion. Why do we treasure human and value human life? Well, we feel human life is an important gift, and all human life. The red light has the same meaning for everybody because deep in the Swiss culture, we believe that human life is a valuable gift that must be cherished and taken care of. Whether you are big, small, intelligent or less so, green, red or blue, handicapped or not, whatever shape you have, every human life has equal value. This is a core part of our democratic and human understanding of how we see the world. Based on this, we have built democratic systems and institutions. So whether you're called Moser or Müller or Occhiere, in the States, Switzerland, we want to treat all people and persons humanly and equally. We don't quite manage to do so, but that's the brave intention. Now, let me go back to the red light. When I see a red light in Bangkok, in Thailand, where I am often living, the red light is a recommendation. You may now drive, but you'll have more traffic coming your way than if it was green. Police does not enforce red lights in the same way the Swiss police does. Is it because they're doing a bad job? No. They're doing another job based on their cultural systems and tasks and understandings of their role. One evening I was hungry and I took my motorbike and I was driving past the Erawan shrine to go to a favorite curry place to have a green curry late night. And I came up to a large intersection and I saw the red light. I had just arrived from Switzerland and I stopped my motorbike, the very orderly Swiss as I am. And a police drove up to me, a policeman, and shouted to me in Thai. He realized I didn't understand. I said, "Oh, Nitnoy, sorry, I don't speak Thai." And he said, "You drive, red light, no traffic, drive." I was hindering the traffic from flowing. And I thought, oh, yes, of course. And I was apologetic and said, sorry. And I sped off with my little motorbike. And the last thing that I wanted was to provoke a Thai policeman. And I genuinely try to abide to the customs and laws in the countries that I visit and work in. In that moment, my default programming had kicked in. Now, a red light in Thailand has a very different meaning. The police interprets the red light different. I've asked them, what is your primary objective as policemen? Why are you here? What do you have to do at this intersection? And they said, just make sure that the traffic rolls, less traffic jam. And I thought, okay, well, you're not always that successful if you look at the amount of hours you spend in traffic jams in Thailand, but that's not their fault. What about security? Oh, I don't know. If the gods want, you have an accident. If not, it's okay. Putting on a helmet? Well, you can, you don't have to. You understand there's a very different approach to the concept of safety. All these understandings in this example shows how culture shapes the world we are in. Let's have a look at culture identity. Culture identity is how this programming shapes me and the groups that I belong to. So it shows how I define myself in relations to other. It's dynamic. Culture identity is ever changing. Culture identity is put together of race, sex, or gender, age. It could be a subculture. Maybe I like skating, or here I'm recording this with a friend who's a musician in his studio. And there's a music culture which he is probably part of when he interacts and when he's producing albums, etc. language, religion, all this makes up my culture identity. So, in other words, it's what gives me emotional significance and a sense of belonging. What meaning does eating together have? Sports, etc. I would like to give you an opportunity, a few moments to think about how has culture shaped who you are today? What does family mean, for example? Who is family? What ethnic, national cultures have shaped you? Maybe what subcultures are you part of? What places give you meaning? And who do you respect and why? All this will help you understand your own cultural programming and how it shapes you. As we come to the end of this part one of this video, I hope that you have had a clearer understanding now of culture and how it shapes you. And I'd like to say a few words about culture competence. Competence is a big word. What do I mean with this? Intercultural competence is the ability to behave flexibly or to adapt according to the needs of a given situation so that I can be successful. Many people think culture competence or intercultural competence is a question of preference. Am I more politically left or right or conservative? I don't mean that. Of course, my preferences, political preferences, shape how I approach cultures. But on this level that we're addressing today, I don't believe that that's the key question. The key question is, how can I achieve success as a human being in the context that we've looked at earlier on in this session and be successful? How can I perform professionally in the most successful way? There is no monocultural teaching anymore. There's no monocultural baking or musician. Everything we do, every profession has been taken into a multicultural arena. And so intercultural competence is the ability to respond and adapt based on the situation and the needs in an adequate way. By doing so, I see worlds opening. And I could give you a lot of example how being aware of culture difference is only step one. But then being able to adapt my behavior, to go along and do something with a group of people that is out of my boundary, my comfort zone, is incredibly enriching. Part of intercultural competence is awareness of self and others. It's developing a strategy to adapt to situations in which difference is significant. So how will I act in Marrakesh on vacation if all of a sudden I have to bargain at the market? What strategy? How do I prepare for that? How do I actually adapt in that moment? And what knowledge do I need to be able to adapt accordingly? So intercultural competence, which we'll look at in a later sequence, is awareness of self, it's strategy, adaptability, it's knowledge of different cultures and systems and how they shape us, and the ability to act differently, to communicate differently, with the goal of actually building bridges rather than going back into caves. And building bridges has the meaning of going further. It allows us to go into new areas, to explore new lands, to smell new smells and tastes, and to interact with people who have been influenced in a different way than we have, whom we can learn from, benefit from, interact with, and gain a whole new understanding of this world that we are in. I encourage you to take a moment as we close with this session today to think about your culture identity. think about what is normal and familiar to you, and why has that become so? And imagine taking off your culture lens and just taking perhaps another one by visiting some friends who maybe are in the neighborhood, part of a different culture group, by maybe interacting with a different social group once and seeing how they see the world, and just becoming comfortable with changing the lens and the perspective through which you see the world. And I promise you, this will be a fascinating, maybe a slightly daunting, but an enriching experience. In the next part, video part 2, we will be looking at how can I go deeper into cultural competence, and how do I start dealing with the unfamiliar? What are my response systems in moments when I feel overwhelmed by this difference? If you have any questions, don't hesitate, get in contact with me. My email is blended in below, mail@markmoser.ch. And you can find further information on my website, www.markmoser.ch. Thank you very much.